Hello there. Allow me to introduce you to my daily driver, this 1988 Volvo 240 DL. Now, the first thing I get asked when people find out I drive a 31-year-old Swedish station wagon every day is why? Why do you drive this old tank? And I usually tell these people, I don't know. In the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure why I choose to drive this Swedish tank every day. But there are a couple of endearing qualities that make me like the 240 quite a bit. Now, first off, one of my favorite things about the Volvo 240 is its simple, boxy styling. I think this car looks really good without incorporating any complicated design elements like you see on cars nowadays. I also like the fact that the Volvo 240 is really cool and interesting, but at the same time it's humble and conspicuous. So you still get a lot of questions asked about it, but it's not like you're driving around in some bright sports car, so you attract a lot of attention. It's kind of humble, but yet interesting at the same time, and that's a feature I really like. But these are not the 240's most enticing qualities. The Volvo 240 is like a companion in life, much like an old trusty dog. It is always ready for the next adventure. It's ready to go wherever you want, always at your service, and it will never let you down. One of my other favorite features of the 240 is its size. It's unlike any vehicle you can buy today. It has the interior capacity of a much larger SUV with the small profile of a compact car. Here are a few facts about the 240 size that are shocking but true. The 240 is roughly the same width as a Toyota Yaris, which is a very narrow, compact car. And the 240 is also 2 inches shorter in length than a Honda Accord. It is so much smaller than these modern cars, but yet it incorporates more practicality into its design. The interior space is huge. I have fit 2 bikes in the rear compartment. You can also sleep back there, so it's a really good car for adventures. So by this point, you're probably wondering what it's like to drive the Volvo 240. So with that, let's hit the road. Alright, so when people find out that I drive a 31-year-old Volvo 240 every day, they have a few questions. Some people might want to know what it's like to drive such an old car, how different it is from a newer car, or just in general because you don't see many of these around, so people generally are kind of curious as what it's like to drive. So here are some commonly asked questions that I'm going to now answer. So what is it like to drive this 240 every day? Actually, it's much different than you'd expect. Driving the 240 every day is a lot like a new car. What the Volvo 240 has taught me over my ownership is what the term European handling means. It doesn't mean that much nowadays because all cars handle well now. But back in the 1980s, think of American station wagons, and then think of this car. This car handles pretty much like any car from the 2000s. But if you take a station wagon from the 1980s and take it around these same turns that I'm on right now, it'd be all over the place. So now I understand why people back in the day always thought of European cars as more sporty handling, because this car really drives like a brand new car. As far as the suspension feel, the ride is amazing. It soaks up the bumps exceptionally well, but it's not overly bouncy, so it's just the right balance of comfort and handling dynamics. And what's really cool about this car is that it combines comfort and driving feel because I have the manual transmission, so I get both worlds of comfort and sporty driving. So how does this car fit in today's society? I actually think one of the Volvo 240's best attributes is that it fits in any environment. You can take this car to any part of the country, drive through any town, and it'll fit in perfectly. It is for 2 reasons. First of all, this car is from a high-end European brand, so it fits in upscale areas and blends in with the city environment. Because it's a family car, it fits in suburban areas. It also fits into those areas of the country where people use their cars more for work and they're not concerned with buying a new car every so often. So you see more older cars in this area, and that makes this car fit in there as well. It also has that really nice warm Vermont feel to it. Your buns get all crunchy with the heated seats, and it gets very warm in here, and the hum of the B230F inline 4-cylinder engine really just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. So that's another thing I really like about the 240. Here's another thing I get asked all the time. How is the power in the Volvo 240? Now, when I was researching this car to buy one, I frequently heard that this was the slowest car I was ever gonna drive, and that it's absolutely horrible. You have to move out of people's way on the highway, and I would say that that is completely wrong. The 240 is actually, it's adequately equipped for daily driving. I actually recently drove a 2004 Toyota Prius, and I got out of that car and I got back in this car, and this car just felt so much faster. And now you might be thinking, well, obviously the Prius is one of the slowest cars, but it is something that you see every day. You see hundreds of Priuses a day, so people are driving that, and if they can get by in a Prius, they can more than get by in a 240. I've taken this on road trips on the highway going 75 miles an hour for 12 hours. I mean, this car is excellent for all driving conditions. Obviously, it's not a sports car, so you're not gonna be, you know, racing people at stoplights, but it's definitely a great car to drive every day, and I've never felt like I needed more power. It's very appropriate for the car. Here's another thing that has truly impressed me about the 240, the braking. Now, I bring back the American car example. Back at this time, American cars were using mostly drum brakes. But at this time, Volvo was actually using what many cars use to this day. It's a dual circuit 4-wheel disc brake system, which makes this car stop better. Not just for an old car, it stops better than most new cars I have driven. My family has a Honda Pilot that they use for daily errands, and I drove that car and the brakes are horrible. I also drove a Tesla Model S, and the brakes were worse than this car, and those are supposed to be amazing brakes. So, you know, the brakes on this car are not an issue. When people buy old cars, they tend to think, oh, you know, that thing takes a quarter mile to stop. But this thing stops on a dime, and that's something I love. What is increasingly upsetting me is the obscene amount of crossover SUVs we're starting to see on the roads. That is just unacceptable. And what's so cool about the 240 is that it offers the driving dynamics of a sedan, but the capacity of like a full-size SUV. And it has a third row seat, rear facing, that you can fit all the youngins in for carpool. And it's really great. You pack the friends in here, you have room for cargo, you have a roof rack. I get 2 bikes on the rear hitch, 2 bikes in the car, get some kayaks on the roof. I mean, this car can fit everything you can throw at it. And that brings me back to my other point. Unless you're towing, you don't need an SUV. You can fit everything you need in this car. You never have to buy another car. So that's another thing I love about this car. It has a lot of room and it's practical for all situations. So another thing people commonly associate with the 240 is reliability. So let me talk about that for a little bit. When I bought this car, it had been sitting for about 2 years and it needed some work. And the first few months I got it, I did have some mishaps with it. The AC compressor locked up on the highway and the engine wouldn't turn over, and I had to cut the belt and lose power steering to get home, but the engine didn't die that time. Another time, I was driving upstate, going up a hill, and all of a sudden the car was struggling to get up the hill, so we had to push it off an exit, tow it back home, and there was a problem with the ignition, so we got that fixed. After I fixed those initial issues with the car, I have put on 17,000 trouble-free miles. I've driven it to North Carolina, I've driven it to Vermont twice, Pennsylvania, which is a 5-hour drive, a few times, and I've had no issues with the car. So I think another thing that people overlook is reliability. To me is different than durability. The 240 is the poster child of durable cars. This car can take a beating like no other car. Recently I had the bushings changed in the control arms, and I was told by my mechanic those bushings were 30 years old, and they were still holding together. I didn't even know they were bad until he took them out. I'll put a picture of them in the video. But, so, you know, the quality of the 240 is astounding. The engine is extremely overbuilt, and with the power it makes, it is virtually impossible to blow up the engine. The heat is excellent. It's got heated seats. So we're here on a curvy road, and just put the 240 through the corners a little bit. As you can see, handles very, very well. Manual transmission makes it fun to drive in the curves. You have a lot of control over the engine. This engine is actually very responsive to inputs. The throttle response is amazing. For a big wagon, it takes the corners well. Steering response is amazing, very direct. It's not something you get in cars nowadays with electronic steering. A little bit of body roll, which is, you know, expected for a car that's tuned for suspension comfort, but I like that. Too many cars nowadays are too firm, so they're uncomfortable in city driving. No one's really racing their family cars every day, so I like that they've built in some comfort to this car. Highway now, going about 70 miles an hour, so I just wanted to give you guys a sample of what it's like to drive the 240 on the highway. It's very quiet, the ride is nice. I have a passenger with me, so what would you think of the ride of the 240 on the highway?
Yeah, I mean, it's very comfortable, and for some reason it always lulls me into a sleep.
Yeah, so it's an excellent car for road trips, to drive upstate all the time. Yeah, great car on the highway.